All of our points have been trimmed and reinforced with the liquid stitch glue. And I pulled over my background fabric, so go ahead and get yours, get all your pieces ready, and you're going to need your Elmer's washable school glue with the microfine tip or the basting glue with a nice fine tip of your choice. And we're going to place our pieces onto our background and get them ready to sew. This is a technique that you can use with any applique pattern, pretty much anything there is, which is one of the reasons I absolutely love it. And for this specific block, it's nice that the way that the pieces are laid out, we just need the registration points on the fabric from the finger folds that we did a little bit earlier. So we're going to start with the gray pieces, and just to refresh our memories, they are going to be aligned at the center point and along our outside edge. Remember that we cut this background piece big, so once we're done sewing, we are going to trim it to size, which is 6.5 inches. So these are going to all get placed just like this. We're going to glue them and heat set them with the Elmer's school glue and the fine tip, and then these will be placed on top like this. Although it'll look much better and it'll be all positioned properly, but just so you get the idea, that's how it's going to come together. You'll be making 4 of these blocks throughout the Stellar Stars block of the month, 1 for March, 1 for July, September, and 1 for November. So use these instructions for making those blocks as well. Let's start with our gray pieces. So what we're going to do for each piece is draw a fine line of glue on the edge of our applique piece, close to the edge. Remember, we're heat setting this, so there's no risk of your needles getting gummed up or any issues at all. This is safer and easier on your machine than any fusible I've ever used. And then starting at the center point, put your applique piece right at the center, and then the next point is just going to land on the other end of that fold. So that way they align nicely. Now I'm not going to heat set until I get all 4 down, just in case I need to reposition anything. That allows me to do that easier. If it's heat set, then I can't reposition anything as easily. So repeat the same steps for each of your shadow pieces. Doesn't matter which ones you do first, second, or third. I usually go across from each other. That's just my preference. It's not right or wrong. As long as they all get put on there, it really doesn't matter, does it? Alright, third one. Again, just that fine line. You don't need much, and you only need it on the edges. If we're gluing all through the center as well, it doesn't look quite as nice as when it is just on the edges. Alright, looking pretty good. And then the next piece, our last one of the 4. Nest that right in there, and it should just align right on that fold. Those all look pretty good. Now what I'm going to do to heat set is actually flip it over, because the glue is much closer to this background fabric than the 4 layers or 3 layers of fabric, foundation, fabric. So this, I can just heat set it faster this way. And then my applique pieces don't get shiny on the edges. So that is all ready to go. That looks fantastic. Yay. All right, next, our yellow pieces. Right, this is going to nest right in there again. And that should be centered pretty well. If you're having a hard time seeing or visualizing that fold coming through to here, you can certainly take a pencil and draw a line like a fabric pencil that can just brush away, or mark a little dot, whatever you need to do. Okay, the next one. Okay. And for these pieces, what I'm also doing, in addition to aligning that middle and here, is I'm checking these outside edges where the shadow piece underlaps this piece. I want it to be as even as possible on each side. Just visually, I prefer it to look even on my own work. If it's offset slightly and it doesn't bother you, then no problem there. But that is one other thing that I'm looking at, is around that outside edge. Right. And this little guy up here. The last one, then we're going to sew. Now, sewing for this is pretty, it's simple, but I do want you to give it a try with an open mind. Now, if you are a hand appliquer, you can stop here and hand applique this. This is all prepared and ready to go for you, which is another thing that I love, love, love about this technique. So as I'm talking, I just naturally started heat set. So go ahead and heat set. This you can do from the front or back, but to prevent getting the edges of your pieces shiny, just kind of hold it instead of rubbing, or you can also use a pressing sheet. Okay, so now it is totally prepared, completely ready for either machine applique or hand. If you do want to do it by hand, go for it. You can color match your thread. You can do the typical applique stitch around the edges, and then it will be ready to go for you. So let me get some thread and a needle, and I will show you a little bit of hand applique, and that might be a little bonus feature for the video for you, and it's also one of my favorite things to do. So I'll show you a little bit of hand applique, and then we'll move on over to the machine. For my hand applique friends, or for those of you who haven't tried hand applique but love handwork, you might just be completely converted to hand applique after this. So let me plug up this so I don't get it dried out. I'm going to put that over there. So what I am using is the yellow Surfine that came in the thread pack. It's Surfine 2674. It matches this yellow really, really nicely, and I'm using a milliner's size 9. You can use a 9 or a 10, but this is a milliner's 9. I do have these in the shop. They are by Bohin, which is B-O-H-I-N. I'll put a little picture down on one of the sides, one of the corners down there so that you can see it. So milliner's size 9 or 10, and then the silk thread. So I'll pull off just a bit of the thread. And then do a little quilter's knot at the bottom. That's called other things too. So if you haven't seen it before, what I'm doing here is putting the thread on top of my finger, needle on top of the thread, and pinch it between my thumb and pointer finger and wrap it 3 times-ish, 4, and then hold the pinch. I kind of keep one of my fingers in between just to keep it from tangling, and pull all the way through, and then you get a really nice knot at the bottom. You can see that. I know it's on thin thread. There's the knot right there by my middle finger. Okay. Now, to start on hand applique, what I like to do, I don't start at the back. So I'm going to work on this yellow, and I'm going to just kind of open up a little space here for my knot to go get buried into. And then I'm gonna just kind of push it back in with the tip of my needle so that I don't have a tail sticking out. And then I'm going to grab a little bite, a little bit of the gray fabric, and then I'm going to go right up and catch the edge of the yellow fabric. And that is my applique stitch. So it's going to be pretty invisible. And I am doing a single strand. So again, same thing, just catch that gray fabric. You don't need to go through to the background. Just catching the gray is plenty. You only want to do a thread or two on the edge of the yellow. You don't want to take a big, huge chunk or it'll look like a blanket stitch. We want it to be a nice, invisible applique stitch. So you can see there, just a couple of threads there. Okay, and then you can do the same applique stitch all the way around. There should be about a 1/8 of an inch-ish, not quite a 1/4 of an inch in between each stitch. You could even go smaller if you wanted to. So you keep going all the way around, and once you get to the end, you can tie your knot to the back if you would like to, or you can bury it into your between the layers as well if you prefer. All right, maybe I'll keep working on this since I do have two, and show the completed hand appliqued one as well. I think that might actually be kind of nice. So that's a short little brief overview on hand applique. Do ask me questions. Since I wasn't really planning on showing it, I didn't have it completely planned out to give you all the nitty-gritty about it, but it is a really fun technique. Having everything glued down really makes it easy to do all of the hand applique. You don't have to worry about any of your pieces shifting on you or poking yourself with pins because you have all of these pinned down. So if you are working on any other hand applique projects, I highly recommend this applique technique. And if you're really comfortable with the applique technique and you've used the foundation before, give that lightweight foundation a try as well. It is just a dream to work with for hand applique. The needle goes through it much easier than the regular, although this isn't terrible at all. And it really gives a beautiful look to your work. So next we are going to go ahead and sew by machine, and I will get my machine all set up. We'll walk through all this, all of the stuff that you need to know and the things that you'll need for sewing with your machine. I'll see you in a minute. I'm using my Bernina for sewing my machine applique because I'm going to use a zigzag stitch. Any machine that you have that can do an adjustable zigzag stitch should work just fine for this technique. Now, on my Bernina, I do want to point out that I'm using a 37, the number 37 foot. And I'm using machine embroidery needles by Schmetz. They are my favorite. I mentioned them at the beginning of the video and showed you the packaging for those. And I'm using the sulky monofilament thread. Now the sulky's not in here yet. This is the previous thread that was in there. Sulky can be a little tricky to thread into your machine. I have a thread tree standing behind the back of my machine. I have a picture of it and I'm going to put it in the video so you can see what that looks like at the back of the machine. A lot of people who have a hard time using monofilament on their machine, if it causes issues when they're sewing or it bunches up or you get a lot of backlashing, usually are using the thread spool holder, and I just lost what the technical term is, so I'm so sorry. Oh goodness. Anyway, you know, the one that comes on the machine. They use that, and the way that the thread pulls off of that is sometimes really problematic for monofilament. So I highly recommend using a thread tree. So usually a thread tree can help a lot with any of those thread issues. So I tied off the monofilament to the previous thread, and what I'm going to do here is pull it through, tied on, so that the monofilament just comes through the machine. See, now it's at there's the knot right at the needle, if you can see that. And then I'm just going to give it a little gentle tug, and now it's through the needle. So that makes threading monofilament so much easier. It's like if you have a serger, it's like when you tie off and change your threads on a serger. Now my Bernina has this kind of a bobbin. It has a wing on it. Now if you have a drop-in bobbin machine or other types of bobbins, you're not going to probably have this. If you do have the Bernina, it is important to thread the monofilament through that little wing. I don't always use it if I'm piecing, but definitely when I am, I should have done it before camera, definitely when I am doing the zigzag and decorative stitches. So see, it's right, goes right through that little wing. And then I will put that into my machine. And then I'm going to go ahead and pull up my bobbin thread from the bottom. Now let's talk about the stitch. I'm using a zigzag stitch on my Bernina, and not all Berninas I know will have the exact same stitch, but it's number 2. And it's adjustable, and I've changed it to a 1 width and a 1 length. So it's a very small zigzag stitch, which is why it can go right between the toes on that number 37 foot. I want to have more control, so I'm not using my zigzag foot. I like using this foot better. If you've also had other issues with monofilament, try a foot that has narrower toes, especially using that smaller zigzag. So there's other things you can try to see if maybe your machine will have a better time with it. Also, the tension is set to 0 for the top tension, and that just helps the monofilament to stitch more smoothly and not grab as much, and it brings the stitch to the back. We don't want the stitch to be even on this. We want most of the stitch to go to the back of the piece. So I'm going to start my applique on the gray. You can start on the gray or the yellow, it really doesn't matter. I'm going to put my foot down, and the zigzag stitch is set up right now to start on the outside, so I am landing that stitch on the outside of my piece. On the zigzag, one is going to catch the background, and then it's going to zag back over and catch the applique, and we want it to be small. Then when everything is washed, it actually gives the look of hand applique, and the edges kind of tuck under, and it just looks really, really lovely. So let's go ahead and give that a start. You can see it's catching it on, it's really small, but that's what we want. We want it to just barely catch. And you notice I started like midway on the side and not at the point. I don't like to start at a point if I can avoid it. I like to sew to a point and pivot. So we'll do that. Now I do want to mention, as I get closer to that point, you're going to notice that there is only a 1/4 of an inch between that point and the edge of my fabric. This is my test block. This is the first one that I made that I didn't sew. So this background fabric is 6.5 inches. So I will see how much draw or if it does shrink. So don't worry if your point has more space from the point to the edge of the fabric, because it should if you cut the background big like I suggested. Okay, so we're almost to the point. My goal is to get the needle to land in the point of the fabric. If that doesn't happen, oh, look at that. That worked great. If it doesn't happen, don't worry. So I'm going to pivot and make it perpendicular, and I'm going to stitch off the edge. I'm going to pivot again and get it lined up to go down the edge, and then it should go right back. That was really good. That worked really well. I love when that happens. That does not always happen when it goes right back in the same hole. But when it does, it's really magical, and that was fantastic. Don't worry if yours doesn't do that. If it's off a little bit, please don't worry at all. Okay, so let's cruise on down here. Our goal also is to try and do this continuously without having to stop and start all the time. So let me show you, let me point out what I'm going to do. I'm going to come around this side, and then I'm going to continue and go around this point, and then I'm going to go around this outside gray one over here, and then I'm going to come back around and go to this gray one, and then I'm going to come back up to where I started, rather than doing one petal at a time and having lots of starts and stops. And then I'm going to repeat the same process with the yellows. All right, let's keep going. Now I can see that my stitch is nice and small. I do recommend doing a couple of test stitches if you aren't sure if the one width and one length is too small or too big for your machine. Go ahead and do a test and see what you like best. I recommend keeping it definitely under 1.5. Oops, I got off the edge. If that happens to you, just kind of jump it back in place. I'm going to back stitch just a little bit to catch it again, but I am not going to unstitch it at all because that's just extra work. So I'm just going to go back and just catch that. And if I need to, I could always anchor it by hand. That could be a sign that my stitch is a little too narrow on the width, not the length. All right, here we go. Now what's going to happen here is as I get closer to the yellow, it is going to catch both the yellow and the gray, which is just fine. But I want to go right down the middle of the seam. I want the outside needle to go through that center of that seam right there. And at this point, it doesn't matter too much. Remember, we're going to just keep it continuous. So I'm going to go around another petal now. I'm going to go around this one because I don't have to change directions. And then just making sure it continues on and off of the applique piece of background. This is not speedy. I recommend not being speedy. Take your time. All right, we'll come to another point. Now watch, it's not going to do what it did before. It's not going to have that magical matchup like before. So we'll see what happens here. Oh, it landed off, and if it does that, don't worry. And see, it goes right back, and then pivot again. So that's a good point too. Okay, now this is about where I went off the edge on the other side, so that means you just need to move your piece a little bit. Just make that little adjustment. All right, we're coming to the center again, and we're going to go around this petal here. All right, we're doing pretty good. Almost to another point. Oh. And through the center one more time. And do a little pivot. And to another, oh, that one landed close to the point. Alright, off the center, catch the point again, and keep on going. I think I was going too fast. My machine said, hey, wait a second, slow it down, lady. Make a level adjustment. And we'll finish up that one side where we started. Now I am going over a little bit of what I sewed before, but that's quite alright. Okay, now we're getting close. You can see the end is in sight. So what I'm going to do here is, you'll notice, and I didn't mention it, I just started fresh. I didn't backstitch or lock stitch, and you certainly can at the start. But I just didn't. There's no reason why I didn't. I just didn't. And so I am going to make sure I lock that stitch in. Usually I do at least do a lock stitch or a back stitch at the start. But since I know I did not here, I'm going to overlap the stitches a couple of times, and I'm going to do a lock stitch. So what a lock stitch is, or as some machines have just an automatic button for a lock stitch. Mine doesn't. Mine's an older Bernina. So I just drop my feed dogs. I press that button. For me, it's on the side of my machine. I just press the button to drop the feed dogs, and it'll just stitch in place, and I do that a couple of times. You can backstitch and just do a couple of back stitches as well, but I like the lock stitch. So that is finished. I'm going to pull up my needle and foot, and I'm going to cut off, leaving about, let's see, so I don't want to pull it away to where you can't see it. You know, with the monofilament, it's hard to see anyway. But I'm going to cut and leave about an inch. Oh, good, you can see that pretty good. A 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch on both sides. And then what I'm going to do is for both top threads where I started and stopped, I'm going to put both. For both of the threads for where my stop and start, I'm going to try and pull them to the back of my piece. If you kind of just keep pulling on your threads. See, one of them already came to the back. I still have this one. So if you pull it, use some tweezers or something else to just get that thread to come to the back. I think I got them. So once you get all of those threads to the back, give them a little clip so they're about 3/4 of an inch, 1/2 an inch. And remember that liquid stitch that I mentioned before? You can put a little dab of it here where all the stitches are coming out at. A little dab of it right on those holes, and it will secure your thread. And then you don't need to heat set it, but you can. You can just let it dry. It just needs to be a little bit right there. And then your stitches are all secure and they won't unravel and find their way back to the front. So next we'll do the same thing for these stitches. Now what I'm looking at here, and I want to point out to you, is we kind of already secured these ends of all 4 of these pieces. So when I start, I'm going to start right about here, and I'm going to come to here. Then I'm going to hop. Instead of going to the point again and stitching over everything, I'm going to hop over to here and then stitch around, and then hop over to here and stitch around, and then hop. It's a different strategy than what I talked about at the beginning, but this will work really well for you since we've already stitched over those with the zigzag stitch. That way you don't have extra stitches over them. So we're going to start here again. And now, I did mention that I would show using the surfing in the machine. And I'm going to go ahead and leave the monofilament in the machine because I didn't prep and make a bobbin, which was kind of silly of me. But really, it's the same exact thing as we're doing here. You do a really small zigzag stitch, and you color match your threads, and you pull your threads to the back at the end of each stop and start. Otherwise, it's really exactly the same thing, whether you use monofilament or a fine silk or polyester in your machine. Feel free to ask me a question, email me, leave a comment if you need to. So I'm going to now show you Now sometimes that monofilament will be pesky and it will pop out of that eye if you don't cut it long enough. So just rethread that real quick. Pull that to the back, make sure my bobbin thread is good. Alright, so I'm going to start where I had mentioned before, just kind of right there on the side. And I am going to do a lock stitch because I'm not coming back to this point. So this will need to be a lock stitch here. Now this part is starting on the applique. Alright, so let's get started on this. We're going to do a lock stitch or a back stitch. I'm going to show you a back stitch this time. See, with the back stitch, you just get a few extra stitches in there. So with a lock stitch, it just kind of goes back and forth in the same spot. This, because it's a smaller piece, might need more adjustments as you sew to make sure you continue sewing straight. Right, a little linty piece there. Coming up to a point, we manage the point exactly like we did before. Whether the needle lands in the point or just off of it into the gray is just fine. Pivot 45 degrees, stitch, pivot, and then it'll lock it all in. Alright, that hop stitch is coming up that I was telling you about. Okay, I need to do a little adjustment. Okay, we're coming up to where the stitches meet right there. And what I'm going to do is pull my needle up and just do barely a jump. It's not even going to be noticeable, but I am going to lock my stitch here. Do a back stitch just to secure it all in there. See, if you peek on over here, take a look. Right over here, this is where that little jump stitch is. You can't even see it. I mean, we're not even going to need to clip any threads. It's going to just hide away and be invisible in there. If you're using a different thread, not the monofilament, you might see it. And if you do, you could clip it and pull it to the back, just like we did with those other threads. At stops and starts. Alright, so here I'm going to lock my stitch, and I kind of want it to be in the middle. It makes it a little bit easier for starting on the next side. See, oh, look at that. I didn't even have to jump at that time. That was perfect. Okay, so try and do that every time if you can. I'm going to see if I can get that to happen every time. That was fantastic. It was good strategery, as my son would say. Of course, joking. Alright. Alright, that one landed off, which is just fine. further than we did before, because I think that was really what helped me not to have to see when we flipped over. We can just start right there. Man, that is good stuff. I love that. A little adjustment. We are almost done. We are in the home stretch, final point. Oh, I'm so happy you guys are sticking with me and watching me do all of this. I hope it really helps you as you're learning to do machine applique or just improving your skills. Alright, we're down here at the bottom, so do your back stitch or lock stitch. And then we'll do the same thing. We'll trim those threads on the front, pull them to the back, and then next time you see this block, we're going to true it up. I'm going to show you if this did shrink much, if at all, and you'll true up your own block to 6.5 inches as well, and your accent block will be ready to go. The block is all sewn up, and again, this is the one that I cut the background at 6.5 inches square, and I actually had a little part here that was short already, so it's not going to true up to exactly 6.5 inches just because of this little issue, so don't worry about that. But I do want to show you if there was much, if any, draw in. Okay, so I'm using my square ruler, and I'm going to align it so you can see. I'm going to offset it off that white. It's really hard to see the measurements on that white little part of the grid. So this should true up at 6.5 inches all the way around. And my applique didn't do too badly. It didn't shrink too much. See here, it's right at about 6.5. Up here it's at 6.5. Up here it's at 6.5. This is where it was short to begin with, so I'm not going to worry about that. So this block is, I'm good with this. Now yours, since you cut it big, so let me get that one over here. So yours over here, you're going to go ahead and just true it up with a square ruler. And when you true it up, you're going to align, use your points here as your alignment because you want to keep these all centered. So these are going to continue to serve as an alignment for you. So again, let me kind of offset it off that white so you can see better. And when I do that, we're going to align all of these points at 3 1/4, because 3 1/4 is half of 6.5. So align that point at 3 1/4, align this point 3 1/4, that one 3 1/4, and all the way through here it should adjust to 3 1/4. And that's going to help you to true up your block to the right size and keep everything centered so you don't accidentally get this set at different points. Now, in addition, what I want you to notice is not only to align these points at 3 1/4, but it needs to be aligned at 1/4 inch in and 1/4 inch down. This ruler, this Creative Grids ruler, I love because it has that 1/4 inch dashed line all the way on this side, on the top and this side. So right here at 3 1/4 down, and right at the 1/4 inch in, 3 1/4 over, and 1/4 inch down, and it should be aligned, and that's how you know where to trim it up at. So then you would true up this side, and then you have your true corner. You'll flip it around and true up the other side. Another place to look for alignment is this 45-degree line. See how right at 3 1/4 in the middle, it's right at the center of your block where everything, all of your little pieces intersect. So all of those little alignments, if you only remember 3 1/4, are going to help you true up that block to the right size. That way, if you offset your points at all, you can still get everything centered up pretty well. I'm not going to true this one up because I've got my hand applique needle on it, and I'll true it up later. But I think you can certainly see how that truing up will work with those registration points. So now you have your applique block all ready to piece into your Stellar Stars Block of the Month quilt. I'm sure it looks beautiful. Please make sure you post pictures. Use the hashtag Stellar Stars BOM, Stellar Stars Quilt, and then we'll all be able to see your blocks and your creations and give you some love and get to see how great you're doing. Also, if you ever have questions, you can use those hashtags to kind of get my attention, and then I can see what you're doing and help you out if you need any help. If you've joined our Block of the Month and are receiving the pattern monthly, you can join our Facebook group. It is a private group, so you can ask questions, post pictures, and we're all there to support you and help each other out. You can also email me if you have questions, and if you haven't joined the Block of the Month and you would like to, you can join anytime. You receive all of the patterns from the previous month, so you can catch up at your own pace and also join in with all of the creative fun. This has just been such a joy. I love sharing applique with all of you. It's really one of my favorite things, and I hope that you also find a bit of love for it through this technique. I'll see you all for month 4 of the Stellar Stars Block of the Month quilt. Thanks so much.